guys, it's Cece, and today I'm here to talk to you about some of my very favorite short books. So it has come to my attention recently that I adore short books, and let me explain a little bit more what that means to me. Obviously, it can be fun when a book is short, you can get through it quickly, and that's always good, rack up those Goodreads numbers. But what I mean when I say that I like short books is that I really appreciate contained narratives. One of my favorite things is stories that can be told in a very little amount of time, but stories that can still strongly emotionally impact me. These stories to me usually have a very, very strong atmosphere that just sucks you in and keeps you there, and usually these are books that I wind up reading in one sitting because they are so captivating and you can get through them quickly. So I have a bunch of books to recommend to you based on this. These are just books that I have absolutely adored over the years that I draw a lot of connections between because I think that they share this short length while being beautiful stories with excellent characters. I've decided that for these books, it is going to be books that are 250 pages or less. That is my definition of short. So yeah, let's just get started. So first of all, it would not be a recommendations video without me talking about The Giver by Lois Lowry. The Giver takes place in a dystopian world, and it is about a boy named Jonas when he turns 12 years old, and he is assigned the role of receiver. And basically what this means is that he goes and sees a very old man named the Giver, and he holds the memories of people that have come before, and they are memories that are unfortunate or memories that are really happy but that don't have a place in their current world. This, as I've said many times, is probably my favorite book. I just adore it, and this is definitely the book that spurned my love of contained narratives. This does have a series of sequels. There are 3, however, I would personally just recommend sticking to this one. None of them ever match up quite to the power of the characters and story that is present in this book, and I think that it is an utterly beautiful piece of fiction, which is why it is one of my favorite books. Next up, I want to recommend a book that is just like 2 pages over my page count. It's like 253 pages, but I'm counting it anyway, and that is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. This book has such a distinct atmosphere. That was the thing that I noticed the most the entire time I was reading it, is that, as I say, it is like a small town that has just been turned up a couple of notches. Everything is just a little bit off. It is about a lead character named Camille just after she has been released from a psychiatric hospital, and she is a reporter. When she returns to work, her boss asks her to return to her hometown because in that town 2 girls have been murdered and people aren't really talking about it enough, and he wants her to cover the story. This book, as I've said, has an amazing atmosphere, and it is compulsively readable throughout just because of how twisted it is as a narrative. I love Gillian Flynn's longer works as well, obviously, because Gone Girl is another one of my favorite books, but I think that it is a sign of strong writing that she knows how with a book like Gone Girl you have to contain so much fact and detail, and with this she knows how to weed a little bit of that out to still make an incredibly strong story. Next up, I want to talk about Hatchet by Gary Paulsen. This follows a boy whose name is Brian. He is 13. He is flying over the Canadian wilderness when his plane crashes and he is left with only the clothes on his back and the hatchet that his mother gave him before he left to survive, and he just has to figure out how to survive in the wilderness. This book is incredibly fast-paced. It is smart. It knows how to create an atmosphere. It knows how to create characters that you root for. And again, this one is part of a series, but I would also say that the other books in the series aren't really worth it, and this one works just fine on its own. It is a fantastic story and a great one that you can get through in almost no time. Next, I want to mention Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah by Richard Bach. This is a story about 2 pilots who are having a conversation, but one of the pilots is more than he appears, and he says he is the Messiah. So this is a lot of philosophical conversations more than anything else. It is a lot about life and the ways in which we live it. It is an incredibly fascinating look at these 2 characters, and the conversations that they have talking about life are just really fascinating. I read this book, I think, in 2 sittings, but mainly because there would be times when I wanted to stop and just think about some of the stuff that I have read, but it is an excellent book and I highly recommend it. Next, I want to recommend A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. Much like The Giver, this book was hugely influential to me in terms of shorter narratives that pack a punch. The story follows a girl named Meg, and her father has disappeared, but early in the beginning of the book, 3 women arrive and tell her that they know how she can save him. But it involves something called tessellating, which sort of involves traveling through different dimensions, and it's really interesting. This book was also hugely influential to me in terms of a lead female character. Meg was an important character to me in my childhood and remains important to me to this day. The fact that this book has so much science to a degree that you have to work through doesn't slow you down at all. It is aimed at slightly younger audiences, and so it is built to be a little easier to read. However, Meg is an amazing character, as well as her little brother Charles Wallace, and this whole story is just a wonderful one to read, and the end is powerful and interesting, and I just absolutely love it. This book does have 4 sequels. It is part of the Time Quintet, and the other books in the series, I would say, are not nearly as strong as this one, but my second favorite is probably Many Waters, which I believe is the 4th book in the series. Yeah, and those are all about the same length as this one, if you were curious. Next up, I want to mention Two Boys Kissing by David Levithan. I read this book last year. You guys have heard me talk about it so much. This book is sort of interesting in that it is narrated by a sort of Greek chorus of the generation of gay men lost to AIDS. And they follow a bunch of different boys as they are going through a lot of different things, falling in love, falling out of love, going through an incredibly difficult time, and they just kind of tell all of these stories from their perspective. I read this book all in one sitting. I stayed up late reading it on my Kindle one night, and I cried multiple times. The stories of each of the boys, despite the fact that you don't get much, are so fleshed out, and they make you love the characters so quickly that you just feel for them. This, I would say, is Levithan's strongest writing. It is my favorite that I've read by him easily, and it just does such a good job in so few pages. I just know that this book will continue to be incredibly important to me, and that is why I try so hard to pass it on to you guys. Next, I want to recommend Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. This is the book that I read recently that kind of caused me to realize the reason so many books I love were books that I loved, and it's because as I was reading I was like, wow, this is reminding me of the Chronicles of Narnia, this is reminding me of A Wrinkle in Time, this is reminding me of the atmosphere of The Giver, and that's just kind of when I realized how much I loved stories like this. This particular story follows a group of children who have somehow found a door and have gone on to a world where they truly belong, and then they've been dropped back into our world and they're trying to deal with that. So it takes place at a kind of home for all of these kids as they're struggling to deal with the fact that they are no longer where they feel they truly belong. This is an emotional book. It is a beautifully written one. All of the elements of the story just kind of flow together. It's very lyrical at times. I will say, as I do every time that I mention this book, that the lead character is asexual, confirmed on the page, and there is also a trans side character. It's beautifully written, a beautifully contained story. I just found out there are going to be some kind of companion novels, and I don't really know how I feel about that, because on one hand, I adore this book, but on the other hand, I just want it to be this story, and I think that this story was enough. So yeah, I know I hype this book all the time, but I just think it is captivatingly gorgeous to read. And the last one that I'm going to recommend today is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, inspired by Siobhan Dowd, with art by Jim Kay. I personally want to say this book does come without art, but I would urge you to get the versions with art, because I think that those are super important to the story, and I think that they affect how you read it. This book has kind of a vague summary, but I'm going to stick to that because I think it's important to go in not knowing a ton. It is about a boy named Connor, and one evening he is visited by a monster. However, it is not the monster he expected, and this monster just wants one thing from Connor, and that is the truth. I cried through like the last 100 pages of this book. It is a very emotionally draining read, but I think that it is important. I think it is about processing emotion, especially at a very young age. It is about how people process emotions and grief and frustration differently. And overall, it's just a fantastic, fantastic story. Okay, so those are my main recommendations. I really wanted to focus on those 8 books because I think that those are the books that are short but also have a very distinct atmosphere that I appreciate. However, there are a lot of other really short books that I love, so I'm gonna do a quick honorable mentions and just kind of throw them up here as I go. If you guys want me to do like another video on those ones, then I will, but these are just ones that are short and still fantastic, but lack the distinct atmosphere that I appreciated in the first books that I mentioned. So, honorable mentions: Memory Palace by Hari Kunzru, a book about memory in dystopian London. Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson, a fictionalized account of Jeanette's journey realizing that she is a lesbian while being raised in a religiously zealous environment. Speak by Laurie, Halse, Anderson, a story about a girl dealing with something that happened the previous year at an end-of-school party. 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene, Hanff, a collection of letters sent back and forth between Helene, Hanff, and a bookseller in London while they spent 20 years talking about books. Looking for Alaska by John Green, a book about a boarding school, a girl named Alaska, and last words. Stargirl by Jerry Spinelli, a book about difference and love in high school. Annie on My Mind by Nancy Garden, a story about two girls falling in love in the 80s in New York City. The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky, a coming-of-age story set in high school that deals with love and friendship and a lot more. And finally, Gossamer by Lois, Lowry, a story about dreams and nightmares and what they're made of. Okay guys, I hope that you found some great short books that you hopefully added to your TBR. I hope that I have convinced you of why some of these stories can be fantastic. I mean, I love a long book, but short books just have a special place in my heart. Are there any short books that you really love, like under 250 pages, that you just think are beautifully written and captivating? Please let me know what those are down below, and let me know what you think of these books if you've read any of them. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video real soon. Bye!